Retirees seeking affordable retirement abroad keep circling the same handful of countries, quietly paying more for less every year. Retirement living costs creep up. Popular overseas retirement destinations get crowded. And what used to feel like a smart move starts to feel a little predictable. And yet, just outside that spotlight, places offer the same or better lifestyle at a fraction of the pressure. The interesting part, they're not hidden because they're bad options. They're overlooked because they don't show up in the usual conversations. That's where this list comes in. In this video, we're looking at 7 retirement destinations no one is talking about yet, but should be. Not fantasy locations, not influencer hype. Real places where the numbers make sense, the lifestyle is livable, and the opportunity still feels early. We break down what it costs, what daily life looks like, who each place works for, and just as important, where the trade-offs are. Because the goal here isn't just to move, it's to move well. If you're thinking about retiring abroad and want options most people are missing, stay with me. This one might change how you look at retirement entirely. And if you appreciate clear, realistic breakdowns like this, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to Housing Watch, and let me know in the comments what kind of lifestyle you're really looking for in retirement. Number 7. Romania. Romania tends to get filed away in people's minds under somewhere in Eastern Europe and then quietly forgotten, which is interesting because places like Brasov and Sibiu feel less like a compromise and more like a version of Europe that hasn't been inflated yet. There's a certain order to life here that stands out almost immediately. Streets are clean, public spaces are maintained, and things generally work the way you expect them to. Not flashy, not over-engineered, just functional in a way that makes daily life easier. For many retirees, that alone is half the battle won. Brasov sits right at the edge of the Carpathian Mountains, and it has that classic European look. Cobblestone streets, pastel buildings, a central square that actually feels like a community space rather than a tourist checkpoint. Sibiu leans even quieter with a calm, almost measured pace that feels designed for people who are done rushing through life. And here's where it gets interesting. The lifestyle feels closer to Western Europe, but the cost doesn't follow. A comfortable monthly budget can land somewhere between $1,200 and $1,900 depending on how you live. Rent is reasonable, food is affordable, and you're not constantly negotiating with inflated prices just because you happen to be near a scenic view. It's also surprisingly walkable. You can handle most of your daily life on foot, groceries, cafes, parks, without needing to plan your day around traffic or long commutes. That kind of simplicity tends to matter more over time than people expect. Safety is another piece that doesn't get enough attention. Romania consistently ranks as one of the safer countries in the region. And in these smaller cities, that sense of ease is noticeable. You're not on edge, you're just living. Romania, it's not without trade-offs. Winters can be cold and gray, and outside major cities, English isn't always widely spoken. But for retirees who value structure, affordability, and a quieter European lifestyle that still feels complete, Romania has a way of quietly exceeding expectations. Not the loudest option, but one that works. Number 6. Turkey. Turkey is one of those places people think they already understand. It shows up in travel photos, cruise itineraries, and summer vacation plans. And that's exactly why it gets overlooked as a serious retirement option. Because when most people think of Turkey, they're thinking short-term. Hotels, beaches, a week or two, then back home. What they're not seeing is what happens when you step just a little outside that tourist lens. Take Izmir, for example. It's coastal, modern, and quietly one of the most livable cities in the region. You get that Mediterranean rhythm. Morning walks by the water, long lunches that stretch into the afternoon, cafes that don't rush you out the door, but without the intensity or cost you'd find in places like Barcelona or Nice, and importantly, without Istanbul's constant noise and pace. It feels like a city designed for living, not just visiting. Then there's Antalya, but not the version packaged for tourists. Move slightly beyond the resort zones, and it becomes something else entirely. A relaxed coastal base where everyday life is surprisingly affordable. A comfortable lifestyle here can land somewhere around $1,200 to $2,000 a month, depending on how you live. That's for a setting that visually competes with some of Europe's most expensive coastlines. Healthcare is another quiet advantage. Turkey has invested heavily in its medical system over the years, and private care is both accessible and reasonably priced. It's one of those details people don't think about until they need to. And here it holds up better than expected. Of course, it's not perfect. Currency fluctuations, language barriers, and less touristy areas, and navigating local systems can take some adjustment. But for retirees willing to look past the postcard version of Turkey, there's a different story unfolding. Not a vacation destination, but a lifestyle option that's been hiding in plain sight. Number 5. Paraguay. Paraguay doesn't try to impress you. It doesn't sell a dream. It doesn't flood your screen with glossy travel shots. And it certainly doesn't compete with the usual retirement hotspots for attention. And oddly enough, that's exactly where its strength lies. Because once you look past the lack of noise, you start to notice something else. Clarity. From a financial standpoint, Paraguay is one of the simplest places to understand. Taxes are low. In many cases, foreign-sourced income isn't taxed locally, which for retirees living off pensions or Social Security creates a kind of financial breathing room that's becoming harder to find. It's not complicated, it's not layered with exceptions, it just works. Then there's residency. While other countries are tightening requirements, adding thresholds, and quietly raising the bar, Paraguay has remained relatively straightforward. The process isn't frictionless, but compared to the global trend, it feels refreshingly accessible. For retirees looking to establish something long-term without jumping through endless hoops, that matters more than most people expect. Cost of living is another part of the story. A comfortable lifestyle in Asunción can fall somewhere between $1,000 and $1,600 a month. Housing is affordable. Daily expenses are manageable. And you're not constantly adjusting your budget just to keep up. It's not about luxury. It's about sustainability. And that word fits Paraguay well. Life here is quiet, understated, and practical. It's not built around entertainment or spectacle. It's built around routine. You settle in, you find your rhythm, and things become predictable in a way that feels stable rather than dull. Of course, this isn't for everyone. If you're looking for a vibrant expat scene or a highly polished, walkable European-style environment, this may feel too low-key. Infrastructure is improving, but it's not world-class, and culturally, it requires a bit more adjustment than more familiar destinations. But for retirees who prioritize simplicity, affordability, and long-term viability over aesthetics and attention, Paraguay offers something rare. Not a headline destination, but a quietly strategic one. Before we move on, take a second and think about this. So far, none of these places are the ones you usually hear about. And that's not by accident. The popular retirement destinations, they've already been priced, crowded, and, in some cases, overcomplicated. What we're looking at here are places that are still early. Not perfect, but still offering room to make a smart move without rushing into something everyone else is already doing. And the interesting part is, as we go higher on this list, the balance starts to shift even more. Better lifestyle, more flexibility, and in some cases, surprisingly simple ways to stay long-term. If you've made it this far, you're already thinking differently than most people when it comes to retirement. And that's a good place to be. Now, the next few locations take this a step further, and one of them especially tends to catch people completely off guard. Number 4. Albania. Albania has a habit of surprising people, usually because expectations start low and end somewhere much higher than anticipated. It sits right along the same stretch of coastline as Greece, sharing the same turquoise water, the same dramatic hills, the same sun-drenched rhythm of life, and yet somehow it exists at a completely different price point. In places like Saranda, you get that classic Mediterranean setting: morning coffee by the sea, slow afternoons, evenings that stretch out without urgency, but without the crowd density or the premium attached to it. It feels like what people were hoping to find in Southern Europe 15 or 20 years ago, before everything became well discovered. Financially, it's one of those rare combinations that still holds together. A comfortable lifestyle can fall between $1,200 and $1,800 a month, depending on how you choose to live. Rent is accessible, dining out remains affordable, and daily expenses don't slowly chip away at your budget the way they tend to in more established expat hubs. And then there's the simplicity of staying. Americans can remain in Albania for up to 1 year visa-free, which quietly removes one of the biggest stress points in retiring abroad. You're not dealing with constant renewals or trying to interpret shifting immigration rules. You arrive, settle in, and take your time figuring things out. What makes Albania stand out, though, is how unpolished it still feels in a good way. It hasn't been over-curated for international expectations. It's functional, welcoming, and increasingly livable, but it hasn't lost its sense of authenticity. Life here isn't staged. It just unfolds. In Albania, infrastructure can vary, especially outside the main areas, and things don't always move at the pace you might be used to. But for many retirees, that slower, less commercialized rhythm becomes part of the appeal rather than a drawback. Albania offers something that's getting harder to find: a coastal European lifestyle that still feels accessible, not because it's trying to compete, but because it hasn't been fully noticed yet. Number 3. Bulgaria. Bulgaria sits in a very unusual position. It's part of the European Union, which means structure, stability, and a certain level of predictability, but it hasn't absorbed the pricing pressure that usually comes with that label. And that creates a gap. A quiet one, but a very useful one. Start with Plovdiv. It's one of the oldest cities in Europe, but it doesn't carry itself like a museum. It's lived in, layered, and surprisingly relaxed. You'll find Roman ruins casually sitting next to cafes where people linger far longer than they need to. There's culture here, but it's not performing for anyone. It just exists, and you step into it. Then there's Varna along the Black Sea. This is where things shift from historic to coastal. Not in a resort-heavy, overdeveloped way, but in a more grounded, everyday kind of living. Walkable promenades, open sea views, and a pace that doesn't feel like it's trying to impress you. It just works. Financially, Bulgaria is one of those places where the numbers still make sense. A comfortable lifestyle can fall somewhere between $1,100 and $1,800 a month, depending on how you live. Rent is still accessible. Property is within reach for many retirees, and everyday expenses don't come with that constant feeling of being quietly overcharged. And that's really the theme here. Value without friction. Life moves slower but not inefficiently. Things are stable, predictable. You're not dealing with the kind of volatility or crowd pressure that shows up in more popular European destinations. It's the kind of place where routines settle in easily, and over time that becomes more valuable than novelty. In Bulgaria, bureaucracy can test your patience on the wrong day. And outside larger cities, English isn't always guaranteed. But those trade-offs tend to fade once daily life finds its rhythm. What Bulgaria offers is something that's becoming harder to find in Europe. A balance, access to the EU lifestyle, without the financial strain that usually comes with it. Not flashy, not heavily marketed, but quietly one of the best value for money options on the continent. Number 2, Georgia. Georgia has a way of removing pressure from the decision-making process, not by trying to convince you, but by quietly giving you more room than most countries ever would. Start with the part that tends to catch people off guard. Americans can stay here for up to 365 days, visa-free. Not 90 days with a calendar countdown hovering over your shoulder. Not a complicated extension process, just a full year. That alone changes the tone of everything. You're not rushing to decide if it works. You have time to actually live it. And once you settle in, the numbers make sense almost immediately. A comfortable lifestyle can land somewhere between $1,000 and $1,800 a month, depending on your pace. Rent is reasonable, food is affordable, and going out doesn't feel like a financial event. It's the kind of place where you stop checking prices as often, and that's usually a good sign. Tbilisi is where most people start. It's layered, a little eclectic, and full of personality. Old balconies, winding streets, modern cafes tucked into historic corners. It feels lived in, not curated. There's culture here, but it's not trying to perform for you. You just happen to be part of it. If you want something lighter, Batumi offers a coastal alternative. Sea views, open space, and a slower rhythm. It's not overly polished, but that's part of the appeal. It feels accessible, not staged. What makes Georgia stand out isn't just the cost or the scenery. It's the flexibility. You can arrive, take your time, adjust your expectations, and figure out whether it fits without committing to anything long-term right away. That's rare. Infrastructure in Georgia can be inconsistent depending on where you are. And culturally, it takes a little time to understand how things work. But for retirees who want options, real options, not rushed decisions, Georgia offers something most places don't: time and the space to use it properly. Number 1. Montenegro. Montenegro feels like a place people recognize, even if they've never been there. The coastline has that familiar Mediterranean drama, mountains dropping straight into the sea, stone towns that look like they've been quietly aging for centuries, and water so calm it almost feels staged. It's the kind of setting people imagine when they think of Italy or Croatia, until they see what those places cost now. And that's where Montenegro separates itself. In areas like Kotorbe and Herceg-Novi, you're getting that same visual experience, but without the financial pressure that usually comes attached. A comfortable lifestyle can land somewhere between $1,500 and $2,200 a month, depending on how you live. Rent is still within reach, daily expenses are manageable, and you're not competing with a constant wave of demand driving everything upward. What makes this even more interesting is timing. Montenegro is still early in the retirement conversation. It hasn't fully entered the mainstream the way other European destinations have, which means less competition, fewer crowds outside peak tourist periods, and a sense that you're arriving before things shift. Residency is another part of the equation that tends to work in your favor. Compared to stricter EU countries, the pathways here are relatively straightforward, not effortless, but far less restrictive than what many retirees are now encountering elsewhere in Europe. That alone removes a layer of friction that often gets overlooked until it becomes a problem. Lifestyle-wise, Montenegro leans toward quiet, not isolated, but unhurried. The kind of place where routines form naturally. Morning walks along the water, afternoons that don't feel scheduled, evenings that don't ask much from you. It's not trying to entertain you constantly. It just gives you space to live. Of course, it's not perfect. Infrastructure varies depending on where you are. And during peak tourist season, certain areas can feel temporarily crowded. But outside of that window, it settles back into something far more balanced. Montenegro doesn't feel like a secret. It feels like a place on the edge of being discovered just before everyone else catches on. And there you have it. 7 retirement destinations that aren't dominating headlines, but quietly make a lot of sense if you look a little closer. Each one offers something different. Some give you financial breathing room. Others offer flexibility, simplicity, or just a slower, more grounded way of living. None of them are perfect, and that's the point. The goal isn't to find a flawless destination. It's to find the one that fits you. Because the biggest mistake most people make isn't choosing the wrong country. It's following the crowd into places that no longer match what they actually need. The real opportunities, they tend to sit just outside the spotlight, waiting for people willing to look a little deeper. So, the question becomes, which of these stood out to you? Let me know in the comments. I read every one of them, and I'd love to hear what kind of lifestyle you're really aiming for. If you found this helpful, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to Housing Watch, and share this with someone who's thinking about retiring abroad but hasn't quite found the right place yet. Until next time, live simply, dream big, and don't forget the sunscreen.